Under the shadow of the events that we're living today, we had to prepare this research which summarizes deep matters that some people might not see, due to the expedited matters, which indicates the end of tyranny and an aggressor entity, known historically as Israel, and without further ado, because time has become shorter, and the return to God is urgent, because every time we witness conflict and insurrection, from our people and brothers in Palestine, however, this awakening along with the hidden events that we're going to mention in this research, confirm that this time it's not just a wrath, but the beginning of the end, and the proximal salvation. Nowadays, the demise of Israel prophecy in 2022 occupies the net, and we will not get into the analyses, but we have to assert that it was built on a strong and convincing study, made by a Palestinian Muslim preacher called Bassem Jarrar, but, we want to note a misunderstanding that was recently spread, that a lot of people have fallen into concerning this prophecy, where a lot of people believe that in the year 2022 Israel will cease to exist, and that's not true. However, the coming events significantly indicate that next year, the demise of Israel will officially begin, and from this point on our research in deep political matters definitely proves it, but the media always hides it. And the most important thing among these secret matters, the collapse of the community system of the Hebrew entity, and that is after the failure of the term fuse, which was set by David Ben-Gurion, the founder of the Hebrew entity, which aims to fuse all the Jews of the world into one nationalism system, away from multiple identities. And from the things that indicate the demise of Israel, is the increasing numbers of the displaced and the collapse of the national consensus theory, and also the failure of determining the essence of the Jewish country, in addition to the failure in changing the governing policies. Because of those things, fear of the future is generated at the Jews, as Israel became a heavy burden on the American strategy, and more than that is the immense failure of the state against the Palestinian resistance, especially after the resistance in the last weeks managed to break the legend of the Iron Dome, and only with homemade rockets. And away from the lights, and in the secret world, after Benjamin Netanyahu fell under the eyes of the Jews, anxiety cases inside Israel increased, that it reached the level of obsession that a collapse might occur in the internal party, which resulted a few years ago in a general rebellion in Israel, and now it is recurring on a larger scale, in the example of an ideological and sectarian revolutions in the inside, and the emergence of complaints in both the military and the intelligence agency. When Shimon Peres was asked whether Israel going to exist for another 60 years, he answered the journalist quietly, "Ask me whether Israel will exist in 10 years only," for the internal entity of the Hebrew entity started corroding and collapsing. So here it is, the national consensus theory crumbling deeply, due to the widening of the gap between secular and religious people, represented in Samaritans, which led to a state of constant enmity between Eastern, Western and moderate religious parties, and what proves what has been raised, is the affirmation of the Jewish rabbis, that the announcement of founding the State of Israel, is the sign of its collapse, according to Jewish religious beliefs, and at the same time, their voices increase to warn Jews from coming to Palestine, and that when they all gather in Palestine it will be their end according to the biblical novel, which is what's happening now, because more than 5 million of Jews got assembled in Palestine, and David Ben-Gurion said, "Now we are not facing a bunch of terrorists, we are facing a national revolution. We melted their land, and they will not stay silent for that, and even if we eradicate a whole generation of them, another one will emerge," which exactly what happened now. In another aspect, Israel is built on support from America and Arab traders, and also prominent officials in European and American governments, and they clearly announced that Israel has become a strategic burden in the region, for it is a colonial project in Jewish clothing, based on colonial power, that was made in the region, and if only the Arab support stops, Israel collapses, because the United States and European countries can't endure the expenses anymore, in light of the current economic collapse, and there is also new things that started occurring from within the inside of Israel, which the systematic Arab media wouldn't dare to shed light on. Articles have begun to appear from the Jewish interior, criticizing the Israeli army, accusing them of corruption and draining the country's budget, because God said in the Holy Book that they are separated, even if they look assembled. And this is an unprecedented development, for the army in the Hebrew entity is like a holy calf, and represents the deep country, which cannot be touched or criticized, because Israel was looked at as a gang that has an entity, and not the opposite. And it did not stop there, but it was extended to reveal many of the moral and administrative corruption cases inside the Israeli army. Subsequently, it turned into a target to everybody, especially after the weak military control over the media, and limiting it only to military secrets. And this did not stop at this point, because the erosion and corrosion factors extended to include the religious establishment, which confirms the beginning of the stage of collapsing, and it might be from the inside, even without firing one bullet. And from a legitimate point of view, we notice that after the Arab infiltrators made the full declaration of submission and normalization, that it is only evidence of their near end. After this announcement, the immigration of Jews to Palestine increased, and within 1 year it is expected that all of the Jews of the world will gather in one place, which will be their end. Muhammad al-Rashid, the famous Islamic Iraqi thinker, mentions that when Israel was declared as a country, in 1948, an old Jewish lady came to his mother. She was living in the neighborhood. She came up to his mother and she was crying. His mother asked her why was she crying, even though the Jews all over the world were happy about the announcement of Israel as a country. The old Jewish lady said that the establishment of this country is going to be the end of the Jews. And then Muhammad al-Rashid says that he heard her say that this entity will last for 76 years, hence the year 2022, and in this year the end of the Zionist entity will start, according to the biblical prophecy. In conclusion, we want to note something important, that the West is the one who is defeated in the war, and for that they're trying to fight religion in order to prevent the fall of their civilization, and what is worth mentioning here is that civilization war's weapon is the power of thought and its validity, and its ability to treat all life affairs correctly, which leads to life stability and prosperity, and that is what religion is based on, and is missed by the world today.